Thanks for tuning into the Texas Scratch King channel. In this video you will hear a brief story about the one and only the legend Earl Tudor. And you will get a great interview from the legend himself, Don Mayfield. Let us begin with the Mr. Tudor short story. I was at some matches down by Lawton, Oklahoma in the late 60s. Maloney was matched into Jimmy Job. They got in a fuss and Maloney hit Job and knocked him down once. When he hit Job, Earl Tudor jumped up and started screaming, "Where are they at Don?" He had cataracts and had limited visibility. He thought Don was fighting several people. Earl had his fist up and was screaming angry words ready to fight. He had to be in his upper 60s. L.W. Martin thought he could settle him down. So he walked over and got in front of Earl Tudor trying to talk to him. Earl hit Martin in the face and knocked him backwards before Martin could duck. Martin yelled out at him, "It is me, Earl." He finally got Earl settled down. What else was sort of entertainment was that when Don knocked Job down he got right back up and got hit a second time and curled out saying, "Let's fight dogs and not each other." Job's wife was sitting in the bleachers and passed out and rolled to the ground when the first lick hit Jimmy Job. Danny Burton was sitting right behind Job's wife and looked at me with a big grin on his face and shook his head from side to side. Earlier in the year Job had moved here to Oklahoma, which was the biggest area of bulldog fighting back then. He came here from California. He stopped by Earl Tudor's house and knocked on Earl's door telling him he was some kind of big-time dog fighter. Job's hair was dark black and he had his hair greased down. Job had used me for an excuse to stop there. He thought if he told Earl that he knew me he could stay and visit. He made a mistake of taking out a notebook and handing Earl a page that he had written down all the weights he had opened to match. Earl grabbed it and tore it up and threw it to the ground. You just didn't walk up to Earl trying to upstage him. Earl Tudor called me after he left and asked me if I knew that Job guy with the greased down hair. I told him yes, he moved out here about 16 miles from me. I was living at Drummond, Oklahoma back then and working at Vance Air Force Base. He said, "Do you like him?" I told him, "No, I can't stand him." He said he wished he'd known that Job wasn't my friend like he tried to tell Earl he was. He said he would have knocked him on his ass. Don't you think for a minute he wouldn't have? I know he would have for sure. Earl was not afraid of any man. I'm not sure he could whip a lot of them that were super tough, but he did not fear them. The first time Don took Danny Burton over to Earl Tudor came out of the house and stuck his nose to Danny's face and walked in a circle all the way around Danny with his head and nose real close to Danny's head. Earl was about 5'7" or 8" and weighed about 150 to 160 pounds. Danny said Earl scared him when he did that. I'm sure Danny could have whipped him. Yet Earl was not sure Danny could whip him or he wouldn't have done that. My real father, who my mother divorced when I was 2 or 3. My dad's brother, one of my uncles, used to haul whiskey from Leo Kennard's house in Mississippi to Earl Tudor's house back in the late 1930s to the 1940s. I took Skeeter, my uncle, to a dogfight in the 1960s and took him over to talk to Earl about old times. They talked the whiskey business for an hour while the dogs fought. I thought I'd share this short story about Earl Tudor with the readers. I hope it was interesting to you. Now let's get into the interview with Don Mayfield. The interview begins. Good day, Don, how are you doing? It's winter season in my area and most of my time I am at my desk writing. At this time of year. By a wood-burning stove enjoying life in fullness. A peak winter season online at the end of 2000. How old are you, Don? And what year did you seriously get into the dog game? I am 63 years old. It was in the mid-1950s without crossbred roll dogs. Over the years my dogs became the purest family. Who was the first dog that you matched? Please tell me a bit more about his match. It was a good bred dog called Lightning. He was matched 4 times, won 2 and lost 2. He was the only dog to live after a match with Tudor's Spike. He was a game-proven dog who scratched game after each match. You are the veteran in this sport. And you probably know answer on this question. Who is the first person who started with dog fighting in America? 100 years ago American fanciers were importing dogs from overseas. I know that Irishman brought some dogs with him. There was no one man who was the first in America with match dogs. The pure families of fighting dogs came with the English people in the 1600s in the area of Virginia. The breed was then known as the English Bulldogs. The breed later became known as American Bulldogs. In the 1980s the breed became known of as the American Pit Bulls. Today the breed is known as American Game Dogs. The breed name has changed 9 times since the breed came to America in the 1600s up to today's time. What was your relation to Earl Tudor? Pat Patrick, or any other dogman? And please tell me what is happening with all old dogmen. I know that Earl Tudor died many years ago. But where are the others? Did they still have some dogs? James Crenshaw is still around. I first met Earl Tudor in 1960 and was friends with him till he died. We were very close. He gave me his lifetime picture collection before he died. The only dogman who I know who is alive today, who was in the game in the early and mid-1960s when I first started matching dogs, are Scotty Nelson and Floyd Boudreau. Back then there was only a small number of us who was matching dogs in the core of the breed in the USA. There could be a few alive that I don't know of. Your nig dog was off of Tudor dogs. What is his story? Yeah, my nig dog was a outstanding dog in every way. He was never matched as to the fact he lost all his teeth before he was 2 years old. In one show here in Texas in the early 1970s there was 7 of his offsprings matched. All of them proved to be game. How long was match between your Tombstone and Bullison Jr.? What can you tell me about that show? Did Bullison make any serious damage to him and vice versa? I don't remember the time off the top of my head of the match. But it was over an hour long for sure. A very strong hard match. Bullison Jr. was a very hard biter but he was not a game dog. He quit on top. Tombstone was a true deep dead game dog. Both were in top condition for the match. Both dogs were eat up after the match. Bullison Jr. died the next day. Without giving away any secrets, could you give our listeners some of your views on conditioning? How about something from Tombstone conditioning? Training or feeding? I have no secrets about conditioning. I published my keep in 1976. At the time when I was at my peak of conditioning match dogs. It's called the Catmill Keep. It's been published in magazines and on websites. I believe conditioning reached a peak in the game in the 1970s before all the ones matching dogs started using drugs in their dogs. I truly believe the conditioners of the 1980s and 1990s have not reached the level of conditioning that the conditioners of the 1970s were putting their match dogs in. When you roll your dogs, what qualities must your dog have? And the same question goes when you game test. In the 1970s when I was at my peak in matching my dogs. After I had been in the game near 15 years. I school my dogs from the time they left their mothers. I let my pups run loose. I lived in a country area with fields and woods around our place. The pups spent every day running and hunting in the fields and woods building their bodies for the pit. I put my pups on a chain when they started showing lots of fire and fighting each other. Which most would be near 6 months old at that time. Then for a few months I would walk a fight crazy soft-mouthed dog around the pups. When they started showing lots of fight I would let the older dog take hold of them for only seconds, then part them and go to another pup and do the same. All the pups would go wild to get free for the fight. I school my pups like this every week or so. Till they were 8 or 9 months old. Then I started taking them to the schooling pit and let them go for 2 or 3 minutes at first few goes. With the same soft-mouthed schooling dog. With the expectation of scratching each dog 1 or 2 times. This is a subject I could write pages and pages about. Schooling a match dog. But as to your number of questions, I'll cut it short. My match dogs would be schooled and ready to match. Starting at around 18 months old with most of them. I had 2 or 3 good fight crazy schooling dogs that I like to use to school my dogs with. I matched a few dogs at 15 or so months old. If a dog showed any bad signs I would look a little deeper into their gameness. If they showed right to me, I matched them and let them prove their level of gameness in their match when they were in peak shape. I never made my match dogs prove their gameness in their schooling. In the way of some dogmen did. Some had to see before they matched their dogs. I did look deep at each dog for their level of gameness. But never to dog them. Or put them down to be eat down for about an hour or so, then see if they would scratch. I let the match prove the truth of my understanding. How many dogs you have at this very moment? What is your favorite producer, stud? And what is your best bitch? At this time I own 1 dog and he's near 10 months old and is for sale. At this time I believe the best stud dog of the breed is a dog known as Kirshner's Arnott. A very pure family bred dog. I have no interest in outcross breeding the families of this breed. And I have no interest in dogs with untrue pedigrees. I would not breed to a 10-time proven game winner. If I did not know the true breeding of the dog. Besides you, what other breeder can you recommend today? The only breeders I would recommend today are the breeders breeding the purest bred families of the Debo family. Rod Kirshner is breeding the purest families of Debo dogs at this time and has the largest yard of the Debo families. I have spent near 10 years schooling Rod on breeding the purest families. I don't think there is a yard of American game dogs in the world that's bred as true from the Debo families as Rod's. And the other breeders breeding the same families. Rod's yard is the largest yard of the breed at this time who's breeding the purest Debo families. He has the purest of the Debo family bred today in Arnott, his sister Raz and their dam Taz. Check out the pedigrees on Kirshner's website and you will be able to see just how pure that Debo family is. That I bred over my 45 years breeding game dogs. Don, you must have heard of Dead Serious Kennels Grand Champion Banjo Register of Merit. What is your opinion about him? Does he deserve to be called one of the best dogs of today? The Banjo dog must have been a good one from all I was told about him. I don't for 1 second believe he is bred the way the owners showed him to be bred. A blindman who knows anything at all about breeding can see that looking at Banjo pictures. Coy at one time had a very pure bred dog from my purest lighting family. He was older than Banjo but he had the same name and looks as Banjo had. I believe someday the truth will be told about the true breeding of Grand Champion Banjo. There has been many outstanding dogs that have pedigrees that show them bred different than the way they were bred. Such dogs as Greenwood's Davis, Boudreaux Eli, Boudreaux Maverick. Mayfield's Tombstone, just to name a few with untrue pedigree. This is an area of the game where one must be a truth seeker. To get a true understanding of breeding, one must know the true breeding of their dogs. Breeding is the core of understanding the game and the breed. The dog alligator also has untrue pedigree. Who is the best pit bull rider ever? And which one do you like the most? And why? What books do you read and can recommend? Also, what videos have you seen? Since the late 1970s, there has been a number of writers writing books about the game dogs. 99% of them are full of bullshit lies. And are near no true understanding of what they are writing about. The same is true of the large percent of the writers who are writing in the magazines since near 1980. Videos are like the writers in the game. All of them are interesting to all who have game dog interest. The level of truth in them are all different. I look upon the game in a way it's a truth seeken game where the truth over time becomes proven. To the ones with true understanding to seek for the truth. Read the story now being published on my website. It tells how the game dog game is a game of seeking truth in an honest way of life. Believe me, in the game dog game everyone is a good ol' boy. That's very different than 99% of society. This is a game about a man and his true understanding of nature. Where the laws of nature is to kill or be killed. Lots of people today, when they feed their dog, in the time of training they try to avoid meat products, many of them eliminated meat at all cost. Last time when I've heard that was from Tom Grubb from Texas. I very much believed in meat for my dogs. And lots of it in their diet. Corn also. Bones and grain. Back in the time when you started with bulldogs. Wasn't there any knowledge of using steroids? And what are your thoughts about them? To be clear here, the interviewers give his thoughts on the subject before Don responds. My opinion is whoever is using this drugs, he don't have a good enough dog. And the only thing that person can do is to pump the dog with some drugs, and then at end of the match ask who won the fight. The dog or steroids? Now Don answers. I was the first in the game to try steroids in my match dogs. Back then we called them hormones. They have the ability to bring out the best of a dog's condition. But they cannot overcome a peak condition dog not on drugs. Drugs have the ability to show some conditioners as a good conditioner. When in fact they have very little understanding of conditioning. Drugs miss the peak far more times than they hit the peak. I was using drugs in my dogs for years before I let the game know about them. Most of the people are spending around 45 to 47 days on the condition training on each dog. Some breeders was conditioning their dogs for 6 months. What difference can that make? And I mean, what is the point? The condition I put on each dog started when I started schooling them as pups. It lasted till their last match. And they were no longer open to match. The more I was able to condition my dogs, the higher peak they reached. Don, did you know Walter Komasinski? What are your thoughts about him and his dogs? Somebody told me that he killed his whole yard of dogs before he died. And do any person or dogman in the United States still have that line? If so, who? I did write and got a few letters from Walter. I never met him. I didn't care for his understanding of the game that much. I came along at a time when the large percent of the game were old men who had been in the game for 30 or more years. There was only a few of us like Scotty Nelson and Floyd Boudreaux who is my age and had gotten into the game near the same time as I did. I came into the game under Frank Fitzwater, learning all I could from him. Then I started dealing with and learning from George Saddler. Then I started dealing with and learning from Earl Tudor. All three of those men were one of a kinds who had been in the core of the game for 50 or more years of their life at that time. Earl and George had been in the game most all their lives. And Frank was matching dogs before they were born. These three men were my teachers. Then I added to what I learned from their schooling. All three of those men told me they had never seen dogs in the condition of the dogs I was matching in the 1960s and 1970s. Frank said his Goldie dog that I matched in 1961 was in the best condition dog he had ever seen in the pit over all his years. To me, learning that from those three men was one of my greatest honors I ever had in the game as conditioning. Game dogs to me at that time was the main part of my lifestyle. In the 1970s there were times when I would be conditioning as many as 10 dogs for matches. There would be dogs working on my cat mill for 24 hours a day. I conditioned as many as 6 dogs for one show. At times I had as many as 3 men helping me work the dogs here in my place. I overseen all their work. And fed and cared for each dog here on our place. Over my years I won 15 or more trophies for best dog in show. I always tried to match into the top dogs of their weight class. And the number 1 conditioners in the game. From 1970 to 1978 I had 1 or more dogs matched at all times. I was conditioning dogs every week from 1970 to 1978. Some dogs I conditioned for 1 to 2 months before their match. Others I conditioned for 6 months or so before their match. In the mid-1970s I conditioned most all my dogs for 6 or more months. To reach the peak I was looking for. A peak conditioned dog would work my cat mill for 6 hours a day. In Europe, Yugoslavia where I am from, we started with Snooty and Mayfield bloodline. We have a dog and he is the champion and he own a ROM title. Our country is very small compared to America. It's around 10 million people including just 2 parts of Yugoslavia where this sport is the most popular. And so far, for the last 15 years or so we have had good results. 10 Register of Merit dogs, one of the Mayfield line as I said. 7 Grand Champions. And 115 champions. The longest match was 4 hours and 20 minutes. And the shortest one was only 3 minutes. Between Yankee Kennels champion Yankee ROM and Rebels Muggs, son of the Homer dog who's got imported from United States. I know that many of them are having trouble to get in touch with you. Please tell all of them how. And where and what is the best time to reach and find you. If there was something I feel has been left out as to what I may want to say to the game. There has been a number of the breeders and dealers in the breed. Who have told the game I got out of the game. After I quit matching my dogs near 1980. In the 1980s I bred and deal a large number of game dogs into a number of states throughout the USA. And into a few different nations throughout the world. I bred and dealed dogs up to 1995 here in my yard. I had a yard near 50 dogs in the 1980s and about 20 or so in the 1990s. In those same years from 1980 I published many stories and pictures in different magazines. And published one book all in the 1980s. In the 1990s I published 27 different videos and over 500 different audios. Plus published a number of stories and pictures in magazines throughout the world. Now the year of 2000 has only a few days left. This past week we created our website and I have plans to do a lot of publishing on this website. I could write for days about the very large number of match dogs that was bred from the dogs I bred and deal out into the game since the early 1970s. I have never been a writer that has wrote about the match dogs that I've bred. Or the ones bred from the dogs I deal out over my years. I've always been a writer who's wrote about the history and heritage of the game. My point being, no, I didn't get out of the game after my last match in the game. Since then I have lived my life in a way I enjoy very much the part one have had in the game. Schooling the truth seekers who seek deeper to learn the truth of the game. And the truth of the way their dogs are bred. The truth is in all games. That's what life is about, seeking for the truth of all the subjects that's in the games. We live in our lifestyles, believe me, in the world-size game of American game dogs the largest percent of the owners. And breeders. And dealers in the game try hard to keep the truth from the game. And the ones they deal with. With them the game is all about the fame and the money. The time will come when the ones I've deal with over the years. And the ones who owns the families bred from my proven understanding. Will write and publish their stories of their years and dogs of their past. Truth is very powerful. No one can overcome the power of truth. I know of no game one can live that has the level of truth seeking as our game dog game has. And I know of no game that has bullshit lies as deep as it is in the American game dog game. If one is short on seeking truth in this game they will be ate alive. And have very little understanding of the breed. There is and has always been a large percent of the game who prey on the newcomers and the one with little true understanding of the breed. All game dog stories are interesting and are value for all game dog people to read. Or listen to when talked by any game dog person. No matter if it's truth or not. Truth seeking in this game is the main part of this game. Right to the core of the pit. Not only is this a game of seeking truth. It's also a game of proving the truth of one's understanding. Our game is a game very much about nature and animals, which teaches us the understanding of people and who we are. This game teaches us people are very much in control of both nature and animals. People are now in control of all nature. Animals, fish, fowl, plants and all living things here on earth. And God is in control of the weather and mankind here on earth. As I remember, the word of God says we mankind are to seek the truth and take control of all things here on earth. This is the truth we in the American game dog game learn over the years in the game. Like the control we have over the dogs. I think we in the game can learn a lot as to what has taken place in England, Holland and Ireland between 1978 and now. With the American game dogs. Each of those nations started with the outcross bred families bred in the USA. They also started with a number of dogs with untrue pedigrees. They also started with a number of the purest bred families in America. Over the years they proved their understanding of breeding. When they started with American game dogs, all their families had a high value for the first few years. Then over years of truth seeking and proven the truth. The purest truest of value. The others became free for the taken. This is true in those nations today in the breed. Just as it is here in America. In this interview I didn't look in the records for a more detailed account of the subject. I read your questions and wrote the interview off the top of my head from my memory. A lot took place over my years. Not even trying to think deep as to how many game dogs I have had here in my place, counting pups that I bred and deal over my years. But I would think it was over 1,000. They were not all game, but over the years they became gamer as the families I bred became bred more pure and more pure. Of family breeding, the ones I proved game. I never bred for style, looks, body, or ability. I only bred for gameness. I know of no family of American game dogs that has produced as many proven game match dogs. As the purest families have been the breeder of over my years. The American game dog breed of dogs, since I was near 15 years old, has been a major part of my lifestyle. And still is. Breeding for gameness and keeping them scratching has always been my understanding. Over my years I seen 25 or more aces match dogs in the pit. These were all ace fighting dogs who were matched a number of times in the core. These were such dogs that kill near every dog they were matched into. I seen a few other dogs that were never matched, but they were just as much ace match dogs as the ones matched. All those 30 or so ace dogs I seen over my years were bred right out of Earl Tudor's purest bred families. That Earl and I bred in the 1960s and the 1970s. The number one dog I seen in the pit over my years up to around 10 or so years later. When I seen one who was by far the greatest pit dog ever bred in the game. Over my years I have researched very deep the records of the breed from its beginning here in America. I feel there was many ace match dogs that proved the truth of their breeding. I believe the very best of them was Tudor's Blackjack Jr. Up until 40 or so years later when Tudor's Spike proved his breeding. Then 10 or so years later the greatest of all match dogs bred in America proved his breeding. His name was Mayfield Pit General. Pit General was such a dog that killed dogs with one bite. He had the ability to bite hunks of meat out of one hold. He would eat a dog as he killed them. Pit General was a dog bred from a family of game dogs bred from Earl Tudor's purest families cross with Bill Lightner's purest families. This family had been bred and proven over generations of breeding the family here in Sunnyvale a little east of Dallas. Over the years Frank Fitzwater, Bud Womack and myself had been breeding and proven this family. We bred the family more pure to the Tudor bred family of Debo dogs. In the mid-1960s I took a bitch called Womack's Merc to Earl's and bred to the young very pure family bred dog Tudor's Nig. The breeding was the first time the Nig dog was bred. It was a large litter of 8 or 10 pups with every one of them match dogs that proved to all be game. Earl got 2 of the pups, which he later dealed them both to Danny Burton. The male pup Danny got from the litter turned out to be a ace match dog. That won one match. Thanks again for listening to the Texas Scratch King channel. Please don't forget to subscribe, like and share this video. And hit the notification icon so you know when a new one drop. Until the next time my friends, as we always say, never submit to life and keep scratching every time.